Thank you all so much for joining us here today for the Turning Insights into Practice webinar, where we're going to look at how we can transfer the power of PISA for schools into practice. PISA for Schools is an exciting project, and I'm really delighted to be sharing this with you today. My name is Dr. Sarah Ratner. I'm based at the University of Oxford. I'm in the Department of Education, and for the last 6 months, I've been working with the PISA for Schools team through the Oxford Policy Engagement Network. It's a fellowship that's enabled me to work with them, interviewing schools and providing case studies as to how PISA for Schools is transforming into practice. As I mentioned, PISA for Schools is a digital assessment. It's targeted at 15-year-olds, same as PISA. And it's all about looking at how our 15-year-olds are taking their critical thinking skills and applying that knowledge to real-world contexts. And it contributes to student learning and well-being, provides schools with bespoke reports and valuable data. And today we're going to hear about how some of our schools are using that data. We've got a wonderful panel of specialists from schools and test leaders around the world, and I'm delighted to introduce them to you now. We've got Pedro Flex Oliveira, who is a principal from Colégio Andrews in Brazil. Warm welcome to you, Pedro. We have Carolee Parla, who is the executive coordinator from the Office of the Secretary General of the European Schools, based in Belgium. A warm welcome to you, Carolee. We have Elena de la Guia, head of the Psychometrics Department at 2E in Spain, and also Tanya, who is joining us, known to many of you, I'm sure, senior analyst and PISA for Schools project manager here at the OECD. A very warm welcome. I'm now going to hand over to our speakers to introduce themselves in more detail. So I might start with you, Pedro, please.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. Well, I'm Pedro Flecha Ribeiro. I'm the principal of Colégio Andrews, which is a private school in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It was founded in 1918 as one of the first laic schools in town, and it was conceived to receive both boys and girls from different countries, from different cultural and religious backgrounds. Nowadays, 107 years later, it's still managed as a family business. I also take part of some educational association as our local association of private school, and also our National Federation of Educational Schools, FENEP. And I'm also member of our local Rio de Janeiro's Educational Council. There's a flyer out.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Pedro. Elena.
Sorry. Thank you, Sarah. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Elena de la Guia. I lead the Psychometric Department and TUI, Estudios de Evaluaciones. So for those of you who don't know us, TUI specializes in educational assessment mainly, and of course in psychometric analysis, which is my main area of work. So we used to get involved in different educational assessment at local, national, and even international level. So, well, when it comes to PISA for Schools, we've been the test provider in Spain for the last 10 years. So this is a full decade of watching how the assessment grows and, of course, working side by side with the schools. So in this time, we also had the chance to support other local teams, other test providers like us, in implementing the assessment at different stages in their countries. So, well, over all projects we've been involved in the past, I have to say that we have a special affection for this assessment, for PISA for School. So, well, I would like to finish by thanking all the team, PISA for School team, the Oxford team as well, of course, for letting me take part in this interesting conversation. I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you, Sarah.
Pleasure to have you here with us, and I've seen firsthand the incredible work you've done, also building the capacity in psychometrics in other countries as part of this as well. So pleasure to have you here. Carolee from European Schools.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, good evening, depending where you're from, connecting us from. My name is Caro Ipala, and as Sarah said, I work for the European Schools. And just a few words about our school system, which is a relatively small school system with 37 schools and in 15 countries, all in the European Union. We have, give or take, 45,000 students from the age of 4 up to the age of 18, ending in European Baccalaureate, which is the school leaving examination in our system. What makes us perhaps peculiar is that we we teach in all the 24 official languages of the European Union. Students are in language sections based on their mother tongue or dominant language, and most of the instruction is given in their mother tongue. But on top of that, they may study 4 more languages. 3 languages are compulsory, and then up to 5 altogether, which makes us really multilingual. And we have students from more than 60 countries, so far beyond the European Union as well, which also makes us absolutely multicultural. And I think this is the most important peculiarity of our system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolee. It's an absolute privilege to have you here. Tanya, over to you.
Hello, Sarah. Hello, everyone. I think many of you who are participating schools already know me. I'm Tanya. I'm leading, and I have this privilege to lead the wonderful PISA for Schools project. I have been on the project actually for now more than 7, 8 years, and on different positions. So I have a full picture of what was done in the project for the last several years. I actually started the project by supporting. At the time, it was Colombia and Brazil, their data analysis, because at the time we were actually paper-based. So imagine in this short time, we actually did a lot of progress in PISA for Schools, and I'm really delighted that I was part of all this progress and improvement. So this is a next step for our PISA for Schools project, and I'm really delighted to be part of this webinar and start this new page in which we are sharing our experiences with schools. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Tanya, and thank you for your leadership and the incredible work that's happening with this project. We're going to jump into a section around gathering insights from participation, and I'm going to ask a series of questions to our panelists. But just to give you by way of a little background, PISA for Schools is the digital assessment. Schools then receive their results with a really informative school report, which is a lengthy document providing them with lots of information. And it's an educative document as well, so it provides them with lots of guidance and information. And then the schools work to internalize and take on board that data, analyze it, and use it to impact change in their schools and school improvement. So it's great to hear from the people using the outputs of this assessment, how it's really powering their practice in schools. Pedro, I'm going to start with you, if it's okay, and your experience in Brazil. Brazil has a very long history of being in PISA for Schools, which is wonderful. Since 2017, I believe, when it was paper-based, I think before it was a digital assessment. And your school has been engaged in the initiative now for 4 testing cycles. So based on your experience, how have the insights gained from your participation shaped your school improvement efforts?
Perfect, Sarah. Well, to give you some context, I should say that Brazil comes from a very long tradition of one single and extremely centralized curriculum. This is a very long story, runs from our all the Republic and during all the 20th century. But on 1996, our educational law established diversity as a goal to be achieved. At the same time, the same government conceived a huge and very complex system of assessment and evaluation, which was meant to reach the goals established by the law. It worked very well in the beginning, but sometime around 2010, there was a shift, and the assessment had a kind of distortion. So until very recently, our high students still were not allowed to make choices of each pathway they would like to choose and to study deeper in their high school. So this is the background in which PISA for Schools arrived in Brazil in 2017. From the first moment, I understood that for us in Colégio Andros, it could be very interesting to look for an external benchmark and reference as maybe a starting point for our new high school, which was already being discussed. This is a very long discussion. It is still going on, but we decided to approach the process. So one of the first things we did in school, in Colégio Andros, was to invite our teachers, our mathematics teachers, our science teachers, our language teachers, to study the PISA items. There were some examples of PISA items already available on OECD sites and other sites, some in Portugal, even in our government sites. They were available. They were not very known of us, but they were available, and so they started studying them to check out if they could match our educational program in Colégio Andros. And as a feedback, they told us their conclusion was that the PISA items fitted very well with our goals, our values, our principles. They saw no contradiction at all, especially because really the exam really focused on very basic and very elementary competencies. So it really didn't harm, as it don't rely in any cultural aspect. It's really a planetary evaluation. It works very well. So we choose, this encourages us to join the invitation, to accept the invitation, and we joined this group. It was 50 schools from Brazil, many of them from Sobral and other private schools around the different states. And well, when the report came, for us, the report itself was a very good surprise. First of all, because for the first time, we were receiving from an external evaluation a report, a complete report, specially meant and conceived for school management. And for us in Brazil, this was quite news, because in those days, we were only used to some rankings who were used in those times. So the report itself was very rewarding, and that's when the work really begins. And of course, one of the main informations was that the performance, our student performance, was excellent. They had a performance accepted in any other country of OECD. And of course, this confirmed that we were already in a good pathway, and is encouraged us moving on ahead towards the goals and the objectives we already had in our educational project. Nowadays, I can tell you, after 4 editions, I can tell you that PISA for School is becoming a kind of rite of passage at the end of our middle school, marking this point of our students' trajectory. And it's also used as a kind of a starting point for their high school here in Colégio Andros. It works quite well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And I think, I mean, you made so many really important points there, but I think that the neutrality of it, that it's not tied to a particular, national assessment, that it's competency-based, that it's contextualized and relevant to all around the world, I think is such an important aspect of this assessment. And I think probably a great segue to Carolee, your experience at European schools, as you said, with so many languages and cultures represented. So it's 13 schools in 6 European countries, but you cater for many, many more than that. And I know you joined in 2023 and tested in 3 languages across your school network. And I know, the understanding of the data that comes out of that is not a simple process, particularly in multiple languages and across the school network. So how did you approach making sense of the data that came out of your participation?
Thank you for the question. I think we have to start with the key word that you, Sarah, used, competency, because it's very important that it's a competency-based assessment, but it's as important as that to clarify what competency or competencies are and mean. Because if we decide that we develop competencies as such, which are sort of abstractions, it's very difficult to say how, because at the end of the day, it's sort of an incantation. I mean, read better. Please read better. That doesn't work. In most cases, it doesn't work. What we have to do is to analyze the competency, to break it down to subscales, as it's put in the PISA report, or even deeper, because the competencies are built up of skill sets. And as deep we can go to this building, to the basic elements or building stones of the competency, the better. Because that's the layer where you can develop skills. And this is the start of the work. Analyze the competency, find the skills, make a map. It's like a diagnosis. What does work, what doesn't. And where you find problems, issues, some skills that don't work, you can tailor your development practice and plans. You can target that particular point or area, develop the methodology, make an action plan, and start the action. And this way, at the end of the day, the whole competency will develop. So not a top-bottom, the bottom-top to the top building. I think that's one of the most important learnings for us. And this is why I always put my finger on the subscales, which are closer to the practical world of PISA and the practical skills of the students. About languages, one very important thing. We tested in 3 languages, French, English, and German, and on 2 levels, which is more important. So one group of the students were tested in their language 1, which is mother tongue, dominant language, whatever you call it. And the second group were tested in their language 2, the first foreign language, which is different from the mother tongue, different from the instruction language at school, and different in most cases from the language they speak at home. And we were absolutely curious what the outcome will be. Now, the results say that there is a difference between the 2 cohorts in reading, needless to say, that's quite normal, less difference in science, and no difference at all in maths, which means that our students could do everything, solve the problems, solve the tasks in their second language in maths as well as in their first language. A bit better even, to be honest. Why is it important? Because when students ask or parents ask if our children go on to higher education and they will study in their second language, will that work? Will they cope? And we can now very easily say with a good heart and conscience, yes, they will. Because we have always had this feeling, but now it's really evidence-based. And that was one of the most important feedback from our point. And of course, many others. I don't want to mitigate the importance of the student voice, for example, which gives a lot of information on which schools can react, jump, take action, think what they can do, and so on and so forth.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And really interesting and important insights there with, growing numbers of students who are, undertaking their learning. Their language of instruction is not their first language. So really important insights there. And I think there was a thread that you spoke to there about, as teachers and educators, we have our gut instinct, we have our heart of what we think we know from years of working with students. And then we need this evidence and this data to support that. And that bringing together of heart and mind is so important. And I think, if I may, I'll turn to you, Elena, with psychometrics and data and so on. Spain has done incredible work with PISA for schools. You take the award as being the longest standing participating country in PISA for schools, so you know it exceptionally well. What have you learned about how schools engage with PISA for schools beyond the technical, taking that, making sense of the data and turning it into action?
That's right, Sarah. TUI Spain has been a long-standing partner in PISA for schools, and we are really proud of that because over the last few years we learned a lot from our schools. They've shown us some great ways to engage with results. So broadly speaking, we see they tend to use the data in 3 key ways: to support decision-making, to identify areas for improvement, and to track progress over time. But let me start with an example for explaining the first use, because even though using the data to support decision-making might seem obvious, the truth is there are still some schools that only see the test, the PISA for School assessment, as a tool for collecting data. That's all, nothing else. And we all agree with it's much more than that. So just consider this example happening right now in Spain, because since 2021, a research team, including academic leaders, educational experts, even neuroscientists, has been running a pilot program to help students really think mathematically, and apply that thinking to real life situations. So sounds familiar, right? Because this is exactly the type of thinking that PISA for Schools is designed to foster. But here's the best part. This group of experts has chosen the PISA for School test as the main assessment tool for this important study over other possible options. So I think this is a great example that shows us how well established, how well accepted is the assessment right now in Spain as a reliable foundation for making impactful and evidence-based decisions. So I think this is a very remarkable example. So another way, of course, that schools use PISA for Schools data is to identify areas for improvement. And that often happens when, the results in a specific domain become slower than expected. So naturally, this raises a lot of questions, concerns as well. And schools want to dig deeper to understand what's behind those results. So after the initial surprise, sometimes shock, schools get to work immediately. And most of the times they get by with the reports data because, there's a lot of information on it. But on other occasions, they reach out to us for a closer look. So then they ask us for a more deeper analysis. And from time to time, we discover some fascinating patterns. For example, students who struggle specifically with the open response items in science, or particularly in a superscales in science, but not in other domains. Or we find an evident lack of interest that highly correlates in a negative way with results. So once those findings are on the table, schools usually respond quickly, rethinking the teaching strategy, the learning models. So yeah, they are really ready to the action at that point. And lastly, I don't want to forget maybe one of the most logical use of the data, of the PISA for Schools data, that is tracking the progress over time. Because many of the schools we work with take the assessment on a regular basis, sometimes every year, every 2, 3, 5 years. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, these schools are incorporating the test, the PISA for school assessment, into the school's routine to check, to monitor how things are going. So obviously, this approach only makes sense when schools have already done a previous work. I mean, they've identified the strengths and weakness in students' performance and the school management as well. They've set specific and clear objectives, and of course, they've introduced a new methodology, a new plan to be tested. So in this context, repeating the assessment becomes meaningfully to check what's improved, what still needs work. In the end, if the change they've made are actually making the difference, and if not, make minor or major adjustments to direction the plan. So, well, I think these three experiences are really good examples about how PISA for schools data, at least in Spain, but I think it's the same worldwide, can be part of the school culture of improvement and reflection, something they own and use to move forward, definitely.
Fantastic. And I think it's really interesting, to learn from your direct experiences, but also that point that you make at the end, that it's, around the world, we're all dealing with our individual issues within our schools, but actually the problems and the challenges and the exciting opportunities are shared globally, and being able to look at that through that lens is incredibly valuable as well. You made some really good points there about the process of how the test is used at the really granular school level, but then also at the broader level around, policy and driving change within the country as well, which is really interesting. And I think, Tanya, it'd be good for you to come in at that point as well, because obviously we're hearing amazing examples of how schools are engaging with PISA for Schools results. And we've seen this in the case studies, the way they're being used in different languages in different countries around the world. But what does all of this mean at the national education system level and at the policy level, which I know is your world in the OECD? So how can participation in PISA for Schools support local and national systems to inform their policy decisions?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Actually, we heard from the speakers here examples about how is data used at the school level. But actually, I think like half of our countries are participating at the government level, at the country level. It is not just the schools who volunteer to participate. It is actually a government who decides that PISA for Schools should be good in their country. So they do it for different reasons. We have some do it yearly so that they can monitor progress over time, and compare it with a national assessment also. Sometimes in these cases, they do also their national assessment, and on top of it, they do PISA for Schools. They compare the results. So basically, through that, they can see how their national assessment matches at international PISA scales. Other countries use it to see how are the PISA scores at the city level or a regional level. This is another way of how the governments actually use PISA for Schools for impact at the smaller level. So not only country, but regional and city. Then there is another example. It is to experiment different languages. This is something that Carly touched upon a little bit, which is quite interesting for us here also in the OECD, because as you know, PISA is always by methodology is designed this way that it has to be implemented in language of instructions. While in PISA for Schools, we also give countries opportunity to test in different languages. Why not? To see how it works. How is the difference so big? Is the language so important? What we learned from European schools, it is a remarkable result, that you can actually test students in their second, sometimes even a third language, and see how it compares. And this is particularly interesting in the countries where there are mother tongues who are not used in education, but actually children speak very well this language and probably perform better in this language than in the mother tongue. The last example I would use is also for the capacity building of teachers. So many countries actually join PISA for Schools journey to build capacity and for promotion professional development of teachers. So when you implement a project like PISA for schools on a country level, you have hundreds of schools there, you have hundreds, sometimes thousands of teachers involved with the same school report in front of them, and they can then learn a lot about the competence-based assessments, about international benchmark, and all the other skills that we are measuring, including the student voice. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. That's really, really useful. And I think, you know, to have something that can work at the school level, but then also at that national and policy level is incredible. Pedro, speaking about concrete examples and bringing it right back to the school level, which is so important, I'd love to hear from you, Pedro. What is one concrete example of how your school has translated a key finding from PISA for Schools into a change at your school?
Okay, sure. Well, at the time the PISA for School arrived in 2017, Brazil was still practicing the old curriculum before the complete establishing of our actual common core. So the way we teach science had to change a lot. And from the report's questionnaire, as the questionnaire compares the answers of the students of our school with the average of other Brazilian students around the whole country, more or less as like Tanya was explaining, we could compare the perception of our schools against this context, this bigger national context. And then we noticed that the perception that our student was having about the connection between what they were learning in science classes in school had showed a very weak perception of the connection about the subject they studied in school and their daily life appliance. So this is where it does, especially when compared with the majority of Brazilian schools. And we understood we had to reassess the way we teach science. And this began, for instance, by changing our laboratory activities, who became more experimental than demonstrative. In a second moment, as we were already conceiving our high school, our new high school, we started conceiving some curricular component who were interdisciplinary and who intended to join daily life appliance with huge, big planetary questions, challenge and issues humanity is facing. And so this allowed us to show them more connection between what they were learning in school, their daily lives, and those planetary questions. And this was very inspired by the kind of PISA items we found in the exams. And in a second moment, those eligible components became the heart and the beginning of our different eligible pathways between which nowadays our high school students can choose. So in this way, it was really a point of start for our new high school model. And all this can be seen, can be witnessed by the families in a yearly festival, science festival, for which the students prepare academic works that they show to the whole community in panels, and their families can witness and can testimony the progress their children are making and the changes the school itself is making since this time. It works very well.
Thank you so much. That's really, really insightful. Thank you, Pedro. I might ask, on that same vein of Caroline, reflecting on your experience, what are the key learnings that have emerged from your participation in PISA for Schools?
Apart from those I mentioned previously, that have to dig deep in the competence structure in order to improve what we learn from languages. It's very important what we gain from, for example, the student voice, the background questionnaire, and the information about the school climate from the student's point of view, which, of course, teachers have to take into consideration. Sometimes perhaps they don't. And it's very refreshing to see the same reality of the same school with the eyes of those who are the most important persons in school, that is the student. And we have had excellent examples in different schools how they reacted on the results and on the data. Schools reacted on the cognitive data, cognitive domains as well, but they were excellent. So some schools said, okay, they're fine. I will never say that because there's always room for improvement. But on the other hand, we found some areas where we thought that some intervention by the schools is really important. And the schools had the same idea, like classroom management, the teachers' practices, which is one of the most interesting and important part of the student voice. Comparing different language sections, for example, from this point of view. As well as bullying, of course, which is a very important subject. So how schools reacted and how we did. First of all, we organized a workshop, a whole day workshop, where all the participants were invited. Okay, it's a small system, so we could do that. And we invited experts from the OECD. The schools made presentations, poster presentations. We ran workshops during the one-day event. And then it was sort of disseminated in the schools in different ways. Some of them built working groups, started working groups to deal with the different issues, put it that in quotation marks. How to improve the situation. Some schools introduced trainings on classroom management, for example. One of the areas, teachers asking questions to check if the students can follow, which is closely related to something very important, which we call formative assessment. So some schools say, okay, we need some trainings or some workshops on formative assessment and how teachers can arrange the knowledge and the development of the knowledge in the student's mind. Communication sessions were arranged for all the stakeholders in the school community and many other different actions. Where we want to improve and go further is still the cognitive domains. How teaching and learning can still be changed in a way, improved in a way, just like Pedro explained, so that the knowledge becomes really applicable knowledge, which is most important, a tool for critical thinking and creative problem solving. I would like to put these very important targets in the center in the coming PISA for schools, which is next year. So we are already preparing on how to react on the results.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carolee. I might ask you, Eleanor, if it's okay. You're in the role of test provider for Spain. So for people that are not familiar with how PISA for Schools works, each country that takes part has a test provider that administers the test in conjunction with the OECD, and you are the test provider for Spain. So how do you and your team see your role evolving to support the success of the PISA for Schools project as schools rely more and more on data for strategic planning and improvement?
Well, our role as test provider has changed substantially over the years. And I'd say that much of this evolution has been shaped by schools themselves. So now I remember when we first joined the project 10 years ago, our role was mainly technical. We were a highly specialized company, and we still are, but back then our main focus was almost exclusively on data analysis. So to be honest, we had very little contact with the schools at the beginning. That was because our responsibilities were most limited to collecting data, ensuring standardized conditions, performing the analysis, following the strict PISA for schools methodology, and of course delivering the school's report. So at that moment, our involvement usually finished when the reports were in the school's hands. But I think that was exactly that schools expected at the moment. The school report was a powerful tool, an innovation itself, providing a lot of details about the students' performance, equity, well-being, international benchmarking as well. So for many schools, having this kind of rich and accurate information was a huge step forward, more than anything they had ever before. So, over time, things started to change. So as the school read the reports and get more familiar with PISA for Schools data and frameworks, they wanted to dig deeper. So all of a sudden, we began to get a lot of questions from school principals asking things like what we should do with these results or what does this score really mean. So it was pretty obvious that the demands had changed. Then they were eager to understand the data, not having the data. So the problem was we weren't prepared. At that moment, we were experts on data analysis, not in educational coaching or school improvement. But I think we saw this as not as a problem, but as an opportunity to deliver not only reports, figures, or scores, but a real value. So we started to adapt to this new situation, and we quickly built a strong educational support team and design new specific services to accompany the school reports. So now one of the most powerful service we offer today is in personalized interpretation meetings. These are in-depth sessions with each participant school, mainly involving teaching staff and principals, where we go through every part of the report with them, understanding the most basic concepts like standard error or confidence intervals for interpretation purposes to identify specific patterns in students' performance. So these sessions are incredibly well received, and participants usually tell us that they left with a much clearer picture about what data is really saying and how to leverage this information. So beyond these kind of informative sessions, we also offer a more structured support, more action-oriented, I'd say. So we developed a program, Programa Avanza. So this initiative is helping schools to identify some key points along the process. We help them in identify the strengths and weaknesses in students' performance and the school management as well, in setting specific, clear, and measurable objectives. And this is not an easy task at all. And of course, in establishing a timeline, a realistic timeline, and of course, in implementing and developing these plans for improvement. I know this is easier said than done. I'm really aware that it's a very complex task, that this is a very collaborative work, challenging work between test provider and the school. So, well, I think, now this kind of evolution, the transformation has changed us as test providers. So now we see ourselves like a long-term partner in school development. We're working alongside schools, not just delivering reports or delivering data, but help them to ask the right questions and reflect deeply. So I think this ongoing dialogue defines very well the role, the type of test provider we are today.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for the incredible work that you're doing in that space. It really is wonderful. Look, we're at a time, we've got about 10 minutes left in our time together. And this has been so fascinating. I feel incredibly privileged to have been engaged on this project, engaging with schools around the world, doing these case study interview projects. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank the incredibly hard work of Natalia Rubio and Alina Rusnak, who've worked with us on this project. They've both been fundamental to its success. So we can't finish today without acknowledging their incredible contribution. So thank you to both of them. I have got a very long list of questions that were submitted when people registered for the webinar. And I know there's lots of conversation in the chat. Thank you so much for your interest and for your questions. What I will do, I think, in the interests of time and addressing as many of these as possible, I have pulled out from the long list that was submitted before a couple that I think cover lots of the questions. So we'll ask then. And then I think the PISA for Schools team will go through the chat and pull out the questions that they will follow up on with, I imagine, Tanya's nodding, so I think I'm okay in saying this, some kind of FAQ that we can put on the website so that we can address your incredibly valuable questions. Thank you. From this list here, I just wanted to ask you, Elena, if that's okay while we're still talking. If you could say that there was one key takeaway from the actual administration of PISA for Schools, is it easy to administer? Is it, complex to administer? What's the key takeaway from the administration that you would share at this point?
When it comes not just administration, but who's in some ways close to the action, I think one of the most important takeaways for any test provider or anyone wanting to support a school is this: you really have to listen, because every school is unique. Each one has its own story, its own challenges, and probably a teaching staff with very different background and levels of experience. So the key isn't offering ready-made solutions. I mean, it's about understanding where each school is starting from and what goals they've set, the direction they want to move in. So it's about offering the support to fit their specific needs. So I know that can sound a bit overwhelming, but honestly, that's where the real impact happens. So that's what makes the support meaningful from the point of view of the test provider.
Thank you. And Carolee, for you, how do you think PISA for Schools insights have influenced school leadership?
Well, differently. Depends a lot on the school management. But most managements, most directors of management teams took it seriously, and that's most important. The second important, that they support everything that leads to improvement of the results, not only the cognitive area, but also the school climate. Concentrate on the most important issues, which is different from school to school. In some schools, we have a significant difference between, for example, the maths score of boys and girls, which is very well known all over the world. But in 60% of our schools, it's not the case. So we have to target on the main points of the school. One thing I always come back to is the added value, which I think is an extremely important part of the report, although not very detailed part of the report. But I always put my finger on that. Where are you? Do you meet the level you are expected to? Or not, because you might have excellent results of 550 points, but if you are still below the target value, which is clearly seen in the diagram, there's still room for improvement. And in this aspect, from this point of view, school management and leadership has a paramount importance of action.
Fantastic, thank you. And Pedro, if I may, what is one change that you've seen for teaching and learning as a result of PISA for schools?
Well, it really gave us a very good benchmark, an example of how to move on towards the goals our national Brazilian reform already intended to.
Yeah.
We got some concrete examples. I'd like to agree with what Carol Paula has just said about the how to see the added value by the trajectory, and those kind of presentation really helps a lot school management. Sure.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. Oh, sorry, you were going to say?
If I can add something,
Yeah.
for a country like Brazil, I think we have many good evaluations going on. We have the SAEB, we have DNA, but it's very rich to have other points of view and to make a more complex, joining different points of view about the same phenomenon. So it can add a lot of value for our schools to join PISA for School. And that's why in our with our private union schools and even the National Federation, FENEP, we establish a partnership with our national service provider, which is Fundação Seja Rio, to try to widespread the experience among other schools in Brazil. So I encourage all Brazilian schools to, if they can, to try to join. It's really very valuable.
Thank you so much. I have one last question that I'm going to ask Tanya, but first of all, I just wanted to extend my deepest thanks and gratitude to all of our panelists today. Elena, Carolee, and Pedro, it has been so valuable to hear directly from you about the experience of PISA for schools. And as I said, it's been an incredible privilege to, talk to schools and hear from schools and understand better how the power of PISA for schools is really translating research and data into practical insights in schools. So Tanya, my last question to finish on is forward-looking to the future. What does the future look like for PISA for schools?
It looks bright, Sarah, it looks bright. No, Elena was mentioning that there is really a nice change actually in the whole PISA for Schools project and idea. Before it was more technical, we were really focusing on giving data. That was our objective, give schools school reports. But now we actually want to go further than that. We don't want just to give the school report and leave the school alone. We want to help more to the test providers and all schools to read this data, to understand the data and to act upon data. And then this is our really objective for the next year and further, to provide more peer learning opportunities, more putting schools together, for example, in regions. Why not? Let's have several Latin America countries participate, schools get together, exchange their knowledges. So this is our really a big objective for the future, to increase our relevance and help to the schools. We also are preparing some events. There will be an event in Paris now in September. We will continue this kind of webinars in which we will ask schools to come, to talk, to share what they have. We will also provide some more customized workshops, maybe on some thematic, so not general, how can we support. So if the school identifies itself in this idea, then they will participate in these customized workshops. So we are hoping to have many more countries also on board. The more, the better. The more we can learn, the more we can share between ourselves. So I think, yes, there is a bright future. We are on the nice trajectory, and we will continue with our schools who continue participating with us and have hopefully many new on board. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tanya. And I know that event in September is super exciting, and that's also where we will put the the findings from our case studies onto the PISA for Schools website as well, so people can access the research that's been done. But I think you made the most important point there. As you know, as a university, we can provide the research to inform decision making. As OECD, you can provide the data and the evidence, but ultimately it comes down to the schools and that peer learning opportunity for schools to connect to other schools with all of the information they need is the best possible way for schools to take their path forward and improve. So look, thank you all. Thank you to the hundreds of people who have joined us online around the world. It is absolutely wonderful to hear from you and have your involvement. And to our panelists again, thank you so much. And Kevin and the team in the background making it all happen. Thank you. Bye, everybody.